Welcome to the Wiggin Sessions. I'm your host, Addison Wiggin, surviving and thriving during the global pandemic. Today, I have with me John Schroeter, very important guest. We have a ton of interesting topics to cover. Welcome, John.
Great to be here. Thanks.
I'll give you a little more formal introduction right now. John is the executive director at Abundant World Institute. He's also the author of two award-winning books, Moonshots and Aftershock, which is a compendium of essays published 50 years after Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. I'm going to ask you some questions about that, so you can feel free to expound upon that project. And I was happy to learn, I wasn't aware of this prior to talking to you, John, that you are also the publisher of Popular Electronics, Mechanics Illustrated, and Popular Astronomy, three iconic magazines that you revived after the information age threatened to relegate them to the dustbin of history. So we could talk a little bit about that. Let's start with Aftershock, because I think it's a very interesting project that you put together. And in our conversation leading up to this, you had also mentioned that you're working on a docuseries as well that includes a lot of the ideas that are in the book. So maybe just start at the beginning, talk a little bit about Alvin Toffler and Future Shock, and then how you came about Aftershock and what's become of the project since then.
Sure. No, happy to tell you how it came about and what happened and where it's headed, so to speak. So 50 years ago, Alvin and Heidi Toffler, they worked as a team. Many people didn't realize that at the time because only Alvin's name appeared on the books. They were literally quite thrust upon the global stage by the publication of this international bestseller, Future Shock. And I actually have a first printing of it here. And the title described a condition whose characteristic shattering stress and disorientation would inevitably be brought about by just too much change in too short a period of time, hence, shocking. And so it seemed to me that this notion of future shock, 50 years on, has actually kind of fully, come home to roost. The idea of shattering stress and disorientation is suddenly quite relevant, but in ways I'm sure that the authors didn't imagine. So, it brings into question now in kind of a most visceral way how we will contemplate, our probable, possible, and preferred versions of the future, as futurists like to say. And we'll get into a bit of that today, I'm sure. But in any case, whether Future Shock was prophetic or apocryphal, it was indeed a very big book, and with some counts totaling 15 million copies sold worldwide to date. And so that's really saying something, because in 1970, the New York Times bestseller list was dominated by three titles: Love Story, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, and The Sensuous Woman. So this was 1970 after all. It was also the year that brought us the Vega and the Pinto. So for those of us old enough to remember, it was kind of a crappy year, and then the Beatles broke up, but Future Shock was also published. So and it was great then, and it's still great. So it occurred to me that on the 50-year anniversary of this amazing work, it would provide a very special opportunity to look back on its legacy, and also look forward to the next 50 years, hence the title Aftershock. So to this end, I invited the world's foremost futurists and other thought leaders who think deeply about these things to contribute their observations. As you can see, they had a lot to say. It's a big book. I think it actually outnumbered the page count of the original book. From the experience of doing this, I had a couple of major takeaways. and we can get into these more deeply. But first is this idea that the future really is a very big tent, beneath which even radical ideas can compete for mind share and dominance. And the question is, which version of the future will win? The second takeaway is that you can really think of the future as a big if then else kind of a statement, and you can apply this if then else construct to virtually every facet of life, now and in the future, whether it's the future of work or healthcare, education, the future of democracy, society, the environment, even whether change is good for us, what we value, how we think of the past, and even the future of futurism. And so if we can digress just a little bit, I think it's useful to deconstruct that a little bit because it's instructive. So we begin with if, of the if then else. If is really the realm of imagination. And I'm always coming back to imagination in all my work. So in its forward-looking context, if asks what could be, right, as opposed to what is. And that ability to ask what if really is humanity's superpower. And then we have the word then. Then is a word that anticipates causality and correlation and consequences, whether those consequences are anticipated or unintended. And there are always unintended consequences, as we learn over and over. And finally, we have else. And else leads us to explore alternatives. It says that we have a choice. And that choice can be exercised and expressed in active or passive ways. So taken together, these things really make up the scaffolding of the amazing ideas that are collected here and considered and expounded upon by in these many different ways by these many different voices. And so lastly, as I think about this, the other remarkable thing is that I spent a whole year with this content and producing it, working with the contributors, multiple passes through the editing process, and still every time I read these essays, it's though I'm reading them again for the first time. There's just that much to unpack here and much to inspire active thinking about the future. So I'm very happy that it came about the way that it did.